The following is a detailed installation video of the Patterns Workwall. For any questions pertaining to the installation of Haworth products, please contact your local Haworth technical representative. Hello, today we're going to get started by building a Haworth Patterns Workwall. This is a double work wall which can be accessible on both sides. I'm not a real installer, but I do play one on TV, so we're going to go ahead and get started here and see how far we get. As far as features, I've got this one on its side. I've got one standing here. This is what we refer to as a vertical. I'm going to have two verticals here and then a top unit, which is a horizontal. I've got this one laying on its side to go over some of the features. I've got my adjustment glides at the bottom, and I do have an 1.5 inch adjustment on this. We also have a floating skirt that as I adjust this skirt will go down to the ground to conceal the glides. Features of this skirt have some knockouts. One of the first things you're going to need to know when you're setting up the patterns is how are you going to power this product. Is it coming out of the floor? Is it a typical base feed with the dog box? I've just got a base feed here, which is a conduit and wire. If this is coming out of a floor monument and having to be fed into the system, I automatically know I've got to adjust these glides out to give me room to do that. We do have a void here at the bottom. So if your power is directly below the patterns, if you've planned it out that well and that accurate, you can come right into here and keep it close to the floor and have the ideal look. But again, when you're coming in with some external feeds, you're going to have to make room for that, and you don't want to have to adjust this too much after it's up. It is heavy and big product depending on which unit you have. So if I know I'm going to do this, I'm already going to start by adjusting these glides out 1 inch to start with to know that I have room to fish this conduit in. And so what we would do is take the breakaway tabs, break away just what's necessary so I could feed the conduit in to give a clean look. There's multiple places here. Obviously I don't want to rip the whole unit out and have a big blank knockout here, but just take out 1 or 2 what you need to get the power in. That's for a typical power hearth. There's also top feeds and some other ways to power this too, but this is probably the most common. So that's the bottom of the panel. Power access, glides, and adjustability. I'm going to go ahead and take this now and spin these out. What it comes down to with the Patterns product is preparation and detail. If you don't do some of these things you're going to see here in the next few minutes, you could get to the end where you're going to have some detail issues, which means going back quite a way. So we're going to try and cover some things here that you need to think about as you're building this so you don't have to go backwards, which is always a good thing. Why don't you give me a hand? You want to stand this one up? We'll take a look at some more features. We'll slide it back. Probably pretty close. On the inside here, this is a right-hand unit. I've got a right and a left-hand unit here. What does that mean? I've got electrical and all my features on the one side. My other side is clean and smooth and will be a finished piece. So there's lefts, there's rights, and there's centers in case you're doing multiple sections together. We're just doing a single section here, so I've got a left and right. Now that we have this unit up, we have it up in the stanchions, locked and ready to go. One thing I didn't mention is if you see the routed out hole here, again having to do with the electrical. This is a 3-inch wide system which coincides with our composed panel system, and this is used commonly together with that. This is a way to bring power from the composed backfeeded in through here. So there's access to that. Once you put your trim on, it'd be a matter of drilling a hole in and routing it in here. So it's a little easier to tie the panel systems to the product. Next, we're going to put a structural beam on here for safety to hold the load depending on shelves or what I'm going to put on this. So on each side, we're going to assemble aluminum cleat. It's got a through hole on the bottom. That's going to be for a set pin to go in here and hold the beam in place to lock in place. That has to be to the bottom. So it's going to come with 2 pins and a screw. And I'm going to read the warning label on here: to avoid serious injury. There's going to be a lot of weight. By the time I get this on here with the shelves, there's a lot of weight to this. So 2 steel dowels must be installed. So don't try and install them without it on the opposite face prior to attaching this part. Fastener head must be visible in the large center hole. What that means is if somebody puts this on here, make sure you see this bolt sticking through that it's attached. You don't want to assemble this big heavy steel beam without this. So make sure you do that and secure this to beam with a split roll pin, which we'll do here in a minute. So I'm going to take my pins, make sure that through hole is to the bottom. Okay. get my 1/4-inch Allen wrench. Okay, we got that on with the pins. I've got the other one on already. Next thing we're going to do is bring in the steel beam. And put that over. Okay. Once we have that seated on both sides, now what I'll do from the back, that hole is visible. I want to make sure you're using a couple guys on this. We'll take a regular hammer, and I'm just going to put a split roll pin in that hole. You're going to want to protect the side of here. This does come, if I did mention it, in laminates or veneers, so you're going to have to be careful with this stuff. So what we recommend is putting a piece of cardboard up, aligning the hole. And put that in. Now that we have our beam up and the pins in both sides, so we've got the safety factor covered, we're going to put this on. This is a good time to make sure you are dead level, because we're going to put the stabilizer and things on, and if you're off a little bit, you're going to fight. So make sure you're level. Now that we've got that level, we're going to go ahead and work on our stabilizer. We're ready for our lower stabilizer. We're going to start with the brackets to get started. We'll take those out of the package. We've got inserts in place already. Make sure that's nice and straight. Then what we'll do is tag a screw in the top. Okay, I've got the other one on now. Next thing we're going to do is bring in the lower section of the stabilizer, which is an extrusion here with a piece of wood in the top. What we're going to do is make sure we go on the outsides of that bracket and drop this down into place. We've got that nested. We're going to make sure that our glides are touching the ground. And then we will put a over the top of that. And again, now we're going to want to check where our glides are to the ground. We can float the top skirt up, spin these down. You don't want to crank them too much. I don't want to start raising this bar, but I do want to flush on the ground, and then we'll make sure our lower skirt drops to hide those. Once we have that done, what we'll do is take our screws and get them started for the actual stabilizer. And again, these are inserts just like what these are into, only they will come already out, so you're not going to have to take these out. We're going to turn these in and leave a good 1/8 inch for now. We've got them in both sides. Now we're going to go ahead and take the stabilizer, and these will be in the hardware kit called Stabilizer Hardware Kit. And so we're going to take the stabilizer, and we'll lock that stabilizer over the screw heads and then make sure it goes down all the way. And that's the important thing. If this doesn't drop, then it's going to sit too high and throw everything off as it goes up. Got the stabilizer in. What we have done is left the 4 bolts, 2 on each side, loose at this point. We want a little bit of outward movement on the verticals so we can drop this top into place, and we'll come back in a little bit and finish that off. So we've got the top ready to go. This is 1/2 of it because this is a shared unit. We've got the electrical harness run through. Every top will have a hole like this to run power and communications through, so we went ahead and ran this through already. Factory installed connections are already in place. Same thing on the sides. We've got factory installed pins, which will actually slide into the steel beam to keep this, depending on how wide it is and how long, keep this from bowing down. So those will help with our alignment. Why don't we go put this into place? Zeke, can you give me a hand? Ready? we've got it down into the grooves. What we're going to do before we nest it back into place is we have an eccentrical cam. Notice the hole offset. So as this cam is adjusted or turned, it changes our relationship in the top to the end panel so we get the right fit for the trim. So that's our adjustment features. What we'll do is get these ready to go. Nest those back into place. And then we'll push it back. Okay, now we're ready to make our adjustments. Okay, we've got our top in, we've slid it into place. Before we button this down, put on the nuts and washers and engage it for our trim, I like to get the electrical out of the way so we can keep this out of our way. I have the tail coming up from the vertical, which is, if this was my power source, this would be live up to here. It's all internally wired, so I don't have to do anything inside of this unit. I've got my whip coming through, so this is how I get power to the other side and down the other side. These do not mate together. In fact, this one I keep up here staged. It will drop down into this vertical, and you may have to get in there and fish it out. So as I stand up the verticals, I like to hook them up here so I know I'm not going to have to fight with it later. Just a little tip, especially on some of the taller ones. So I've got these ready to go. What I need to connect them together is a circuit distributor. And what we'll do is take the circuit distributor, and this will allow us to snap this together and align these together. We want to make sure it clicks and locks in place so we don't pull these things and end up disconnecting and not realizing it till later. So that's something that's critical. And we'll make sure that snaps in place. What we're going to do with the excess is we're going to try and tuck it back down into the vertical. There is some room down there, so what we'll do is get that out of the way. So now my electrical is joined over to the other side. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side to bring it back down into the opposite vertical. Before we tighten this up, I do want to go over the shimming if needed. We will send along with every Patterns unit some plastic shims that just basically take up some dimension. We will actually give you 3 thicknesses, and you can tell the difference by color. Where we're going to use them, we typically wouldn't use one on an application like this, but on a shared application, the trim tends to fit tight in here and we need a little more space. If that's the case, go ahead and use these, and before you tighten things up, what you can do is kind of push this down in here to take up space before you tighten things up, and it's just going to give you a little more room to put the trim on. Again, shared applications generally require one, but an end application generally not. So we're not going to need ours here, so I'm going to go ahead and take that out. Now, to get the appropriate height, a couple things here. We have a couple tools you can actually get from Haworth, or you can get creative and make your own up. Installers tend to be pretty creative and come up with ways to do this. But this is just a gauge block, the same thickness as a piece of trim. So I could set this on here and get my relationship until it's right and make my adjustments until I have a smooth transition here. A couple ways to do that. Generally, we'll just turn that eccentrical cam, rotate it to get the appropriate height with our finger. On a double work wall, it's a little tougher to get at. So what we can use, again, I've got a little spring steel tool here, which goes in those holes. That's why the holes go to the other side, which will allow me to turn that cam to make my adjustment until I'm happy with this relationship. Once I'm happy with the relationship, we're going to put a nut and bolt on so it's not going to move on us. So I'll show you how we do that. And now we can turn that and change that relationship. So that's something you want to have done. This is one of the trim things we talked about earlier. If I put on my corner braces and get too far into this to realize this relationship is off, it's going to cost you a bunch of time. So make sure that you go through this process before you get too far and put some corner braces on, which we'll get to next. So let's go ahead and get this level out and bolt it together. Okay, what we've done is we've put the back top on. Now that we have both horizontals on, we can go ahead and make our final tuning and adjustments here and tighten things down. We're going to start from the outside and work in. A couple different ways to do it. Here's the way I do it. We'll get this in place. Critical dimensions are, let's make sure that the horizontal and vertical come flush together before we tighten it. We're going to get our gauge on. It looks like we're happy with our cam adjustment. So what we'll do next, you just take a rectilinear washer and nut, and we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. It is a 9/16 wrench. Do what you want, but what comes handy is having a a speed wrench at some point, or you can do it with an open end, but let's just get those snug to start with. Nice and snug. Do not over tighten it. You'll start to chip away at the wood and bend the rectangular washer, so get it good and snug. Once my outer one's done, we'll move to the next one. We've got that done. We'll go ahead and put a washer and a nut on that one also, and we'll do the remaining ones. Here's where we're at. We've just finished the top horizontals. Button those up, tighten those down. Now we're going to come back. Remember, we left these loose so we have some little room to put some of the horizontals on. So now we're going to go back and tighten these up. And this is where we're going to make sure we're nested. Take a 1/2-inch wrench, and what we're going to do is keep some downward pressure on, because as you tighten, especially the one side, this wants to raise up. You might not notice it, and it starts to throw off everything going up. So we'll keep some downward pressure on there, and we'll go ahead and tighten this. We now have those tightened up. What we're going to take is our trim pieces now. Go behind the aluminum at the bottom and nest into the top. You want to make sure this relationship is good. Again, if you see this piece higher than the aluminum, a good chance that raised up while you were tightening it. Loosen it up, push it back down, make sure that's a nice fit up. So we'll go ahead and put the remaining 3 in. Make sure that's good. Then what we'll do is take our extrusion and make sure it fits between those things and down tight onto the ends. Then what we'll do is take the screws that come with it into the pre-drilled holes. Got this button down. While we're under here, I'm going to go ahead and slide the beam cover on, which will go up and over this. There are holes and they are tapped. So line up the pre-drilled holes to our aluminum extrusion with the ones in the beam. We'll kind of pivot this in place, put that up, and go ahead and secure it with screws. We are to the point now where I'm going to install the top trim and then our corner braces to lock everything into position. Corner trim, the way to recognize the different pieces, this is a top vertical trim. The reason I know that is because I've got a black plastic strip in here. The aluminum inlay is visible when installed. On the back side it's not, so we put a black plastic spacer in instead of the aluminum. So that right away lets me know it's an outside top to a vertical versus a shared. So the inner side is a flat edge. The outside has a bevel, which is common with the patterns. It's going to install into the C-track. It will just press fit in. What we like to do on the first time is to take a piece of wax, rub it on the inner grooves, and it will go on a lot easier and take a lot less force to put it on. So what we're going to do is take this piece, kind of center it on here, and pop it into place. So that's good. Keep in mind, use your hand. If you want to use a rubber mallet, only use it with a square, clean nylon block, because if this is a veneer finish versus this plastic, you don't want to damage or scratch any of the veneer. So keep that in mind, because this is a laminate and a veneer product. So we have this on. What we're going to do next is take, since this is just a two-way, we're going to take our corner brackets, put it on, drill the holes and tag screws in here, which means the relationship between these two are locked in. That's why we did some of the pre-work earlier. Once we put this on, nothing's going to move again. There are also T-shapes for the shared ones we talked about earlier. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a self-centering bit and just get these holes started, because you don't want to have this off-center. If the screw goes in off-center and starts to move these things, we lose our detail. So we'll get this squared up. I also have some C-channel on this bracket to help hold the trim tight at the end. So we'll get this squared up. Okay, we'll change our bits. Once we're to this point, we're locked together, all four corners. We've got our top vertical trim on. What we're going to do is put our side trim, end trim, top, side, and just keep going 1, 2, 3 in that succession. You don't want to skip around with the trim. A couple things you want to start with. This would be a left-hand trim, and I realize that because I'm flush here, flat for the first 3 inches, and then I've got the bevel going down, and I'll also have the bevel the whole width here. And I can also see in the back where some of the aluminum is stepped down, so there's no interference as they come into the truck, into themselves. So there is lefts and rights. The same process. We'll put some wax on. Make sure our trim gets on. We'll bring that one up a little bit. This is the horizontal trim. There is no up or down. You see the aluminum in the top and the bottom. You're going to have bevels on both sides, so there is no up or down. So what we'll do is get that one lined up. I want to start roughly about a foot in to hit this, especially with the veneers. This is a ABS and a plastic. It's pretty durable, but if this was a veneer, I don't want to start hitting towards the end and crack any of the veneer. So I want to start about a foot in, get it set, get it started, finish it off, and now I'll come and lift some of these edges and line up some of this detail. Notice the gap here. The last part of the detail, I'll tap my trim down to make sure this is flush. We are left with a gap on this one. That aluminum inlay kind of floats in there. So what we're going to do is go to the bottom with a pry bar or screwdriver or whatever and bring that up to make that gap go away. So we'll do that from the bottom. I'll just use this tool to get that and push that up. Okay, now that we have the shell done, we're going to put in the optional backer. We're going to use a 3-piece backer and put it in here. What I'm going to do first is put on these side caption trim pieces. This will hold it in place and trim out the ends. So we're going to get that out of the way. We'll put that up here. Next, we'll put the backers in. If you can notice, we have 2 small, 1 long, wider. That one will be in the middle. The 2 narrower ones will be to the outsides. What we're going to put in first is a light block. So when these are nested together, you're not going to see any light between them. So we'll put that in place. There are some locator holes on these for manufacturing purposes. Make sure those are to the top. They will be hidden by the top channel. If you do put them to the bottom, they will be somewhat visible. So make sure the holes are up. And what we're going to do now is push it in this top extrusion, bring in the bottom, and slide it over. Next is the middle, so I'm going to want the wider one. We'll put that in. Go up like the other one. Now we're going to nest them together to align those light blocks. We'll take our last piece. And then move that over. You can do this by hand, or you can use suction cups. What works really nice, especially with the bigger, heavier ones, are suction cups, so you can get in here and make sure it doesn't slip out the other side. Also for removal, suction cups are handy. So now that we have those on, we're going to put the other trim pieces on. The backers are in place. What we did before I put this next piece on is just center them, because when I put the second trim piece on, I want to make sure I don't see any gaps. So kind of slide them over, get them centered. This is side B of the trim to cover this up. It does come with a rubber gasket, not in the same box, but it does come with a rubber gasket. So if it fits too loose, realize you're missing the rubber gasket. What you have to do is pop that on first. Put that on. We'll start it at the top and just kind of press fit into place and finish that off. Now that that's done, we'll go ahead and start with the suspended shelf. Next step, we're to the suspended shelf. We're going to drop this one down as a 16-inch suspended shelf. I have my buttons, which are in place on all the options for patterns. What I'm going to do is remove the appropriate ones for the shelves, put on the shelf spacer, Okay, I've got the other side in. Let's take a look at the shelf. Shelf, we've got it upside down. These are the pockets that will nest over the spacers and plugs we just put in. The thing you need to look at is the extrusions. If you can see this, I've got some plastic extrusions that ship in here from manufacturing. You may need them in this orientation. You may need them flipped over. What's going to dictate that is, are you using sliding doors? This is a dual track for sliding doors. We've got one for tack boards. So you're going to need to know this orientation before I install the shelf. So you're going to have to look, not just install it. You're going to say, do I need doors? Is there tack board? So it is a little bit of a sequential build. You don't want to have to go backwards and de-install this stuff. They are designed to slide out from either side. That's why you need to know before I install this what I'm going to do. I'm not using doors. This is my front end, bottom and top, so I'll leave those in the storage position. This would end up being the back. Remember, the shelf's upside down right now. This would be for an optional shelf backer, which we're not using. This one would fill this space, but I'm going to actually come in with a tack board into that extrusion. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and slide this one out. Okay, Stanley's going to give me a hand with a shelf. What we'll do is flip it over, get it in the right orientation, very slowly. Slide that back into position. We'll rest on those. The next thing we're going to do is put our suspended rods in, and that comes in a couple pieces. Let's go ahead and get started with that. Suspended rod assembly. Now that the shelf is up, we're going to hang suspended rods down here to support the shelf. What you see here is a few different pieces, which when put together is a support rod. What we're going to do is take the top piece and a threaded rod. Notice the threaded rod has a crimp with a small end and a large end. That is critical. So as you're doing this, whether it's a single shelf or double shelf, make sure you reference the installation instructions as you're doing this. So I'm going to take this like this, thread it into this piece all the way in till it hits the crimp. That is critical. That's why the crimp is there. And then what we're going to do is take this piece into the top. What we've done is take the button out with the number 2 Robertson like we did earlier. We'll thread those all in. If your hands are slippery, hopefully your hands are clean, but if your hands are slippery, these do have to be seated all the way, these parts. I've got a little piece of rubber placemat or rug mat, whatever you want to use here to get a grip, or if you've got gloves, that will work too. Just make sure they're snug. We've got that part on. What we'll do now is take the rod, again, make sure that's all the way in place. We'll put our spacer underneath. Now our bottom plug, and again, a threaded rod with a crimp. We're going to put the long end into the bottom piece. Again, make sure we thread it all the way in. Why do we do that? It's critical that the long end goes down. Why? If this were a taller unit, which it's not, but if it were and you had to do double shelves, the threaded rod actually comes into this piece, so you could thread another support rod down to support this. So that's why it's critical on which direction you put it. We're just doing a single shelf, but I'm going to put this in. Through here. And here's where it gets a little tricky to turn too. This is another nice place that this rubber mat comes in handy. I'm going to put it in somewhat loose at this point until I get the other 3 in, and then we're going to go ahead and snug this thing up. So let's install the other 3 to this point. We've got our other 3 in. We'll finish tightening the last one now that they're all in place. What I do want to point out is some of the lines here. When we installed the backers, we did it in a specific order, and one reason for that, the large reason, was for lining up with our suspended rods. Notice they fall in line with this, so it minimizes the lines that you see in the brakes. If you put these in the wrong order, will it work? Yes, but again, it's just going to change some of the aesthetics. So try and do this per the instructions to minimize some of those lines. Next, in our sequential build, we're going to put a tack board underneath here. So let's get started with that. Now that we're going to install the tack board, there are a few different applications, so definitely refer to the instructions on this pertaining to what application you are going to use. They're going to give you 2 brackets, a single hole or a double hole. Again, this is a double wide, a 42-inch wide work wall. There are also 22-inch wide work walls. So one's for the 22, one's for the double. There are some dimensional differences, so keep that in mind. Use the ones you need, save the rest for a rainy day. The bracketry we're going to use for this is kind of a combination. We're going to use a couple of these. and I've got one in already. These are going to support the tackboard bracket, but they will also support another bracket to support our worktop or credenza top that's going to go over here. So I'm going to have those in the middle, but I do need some additional tackboard brackets. So we'll take the smaller one for tackboard and we'll put it in the end. Now what we're going to do is take our extrusion for our tackboards. This will be our bottom extrusion the tackboard will nest in. I've got 3 of the brackets on already. I'm going to add 1 more. So what we're going to do, and again, follow the instructions. I want the shallow side up, and I want the thin wall towards the front, so it's easier to get the tackboard in. So keep that orientation right. What we're going to do is bolt this on. We'll snug that up a minute. Our brackets are assembled. We'll put this in place. Rico, can you give me a hand here a minute? Make sure that we're nested. All set. Make sure we're down and seated in all the brackets. So that's going to be our bottom extrusion. What we're going to do is take our tack boards. There's no up or down or no bracketry to this. And what we're going to do is nest it up in the bottom of that shelf. Remember, that's where we took that plastic extrusion out of so we could do that. And we'll nest it in and slide it over, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. Credenza assembly. We have some of the bracketry already in place because it tied in with the tack board. But what we'll do now is take out our plug. We'll take our bracket to support it. There are multiple inch on center bracketry. I'm going to go to standard height. So I want roughly a 29-inch height to the top of the work surface. So we have that in. We'll take our brackets, put it in here. Now we're ready for the top. Mordecai, you want to hand me that? Don't know if you noticed that, but what we did is we've ordered these tops with round grommets. You can get them with or without. When using a tack board, this surface goes all the way up to the tack board. There is no room for cord routing and things like that, so keep that in mind. We'll take our grommet, put that in place. What I'll do next is just take the hardware and put it into the pre-drilled holes underneath, and we're all set. What we're going to do next, we took the credenza top off. I want to show you one more application. It's another shelf down here supported by the floor. We call it a floor-supported shelf. So what we're going to do first is back these out. We'll take our bracket, nest it over that. Have that on here. This is our lower shelf. It's going to be 2 shelves together. This is our lower shelf, and this is where we get the floor-supported part of it. We'll take those legs, put them over the pre-drilled holes. So we've got our legs on. We'll get our things put in here. What we're going to do now is take the backer, and we'll need some 5/8 screws for that. This goes 2 different directions depending on, again, if it's a 22-inch deep or a double, which is a 42-inch deep. So we're going to, again, follow the instructions for the appropriate application. For a 42, I'm going to install it on here. Thank you, Javier. And it looks like that's it for that. Now, we will put in, we're going to have below here, the shelf will come to about here. We're going to have some cosmetic skirt down here to cover that to the floor. We're going to go ahead so we don't have to do it from below, is put the screws in, leave about 1/8 of an inch for now. We'll go a little more on that. Now, I've already put my bracket in the other side. So it looks like we're about ready to install this. Go stand it up and go around. Okay, looks like we're nested underneath. Again, the front extrusion, I didn't mention it, but it does come into storage position. You will need to flip that over if you're doing the sliding door. So remember to check those extrusion. They're very difficult to pop out. They usually come out from the side, so make sure you think of that first. Once we have this on, I'm going to go ahead and spin our levelers to the floor. Now we'll get some dividers and finish off the rest of our shelf. We've got the lower shelf in, we've got the glides adjusted. What we're going to do is put our shelf dividers in before we add our top shelf. Again, there's two sets of holes, and that's the 22 versus the 42 deep. So again, reference your instructions. We'll seat that all the way. We have our top shelf here upside down. I've got the front edge towards me. Just if you're looking at this, your camera might be a little different orientation. I know it's the bottom of the shelf because of this. I already changed the extrusions. We're actually going to put doors in here, so I flipped the extrusion around for the opening. Again, you're only going to forget that once, and once you realize it costs you time, you're not going to forget that again, so keep that in mind. So we're going to go again to the back set of holes and put our harpoons in. Okay, next Brad and I will orient the shelf on top and see if we can tighten that down. We're getting close to the end of the floor supported shelf. We've got our uprights on. What I've done is took this out and put in our spacer for the top shelf application, basically exactly what we did up here. You remove it, put the white sleeve on, put that back in place. So we're ready to go. We've got our top shelf set. John, if you could give me a hand here. We're set for the door. Remember the extrusions. Now what we have to do, maybe a little tricky, but we're going to line up the harpoons. Get this in very carefully. Make sure we're down. We'll grab our screwdriver. Next, we're going to put a door in, glass or laminate. The right door, the locking door, will go in the back set of the track, so we'll put the back in first, and the left door will go in the front track. Before we do that, as long as we have the wax from our trim, we're going to put a little wax on.
Wax off.
We'll take our left door. Again, wax on.
Wax off.
And that will let those float a little better. Now, we do want to anchor the shelf to the back wall. It's going to be tough for you to see, but you're going to have to trust me at some point. We're going to put a screw into a pre-drilled hole in the back to just tie it to the back wall for some structure. Okay. Next, we'll finish off the aesthetic trim here so we don't see the legs, and then we are all set. We are almost to the end of the show here. We're going to put our cosmetic trim on the bottom for aesthetics to cover this up. It's a two-piece. So we'll take this one. Take our thumb screws, quarter turn those. Okay, Frank, let's get this on here. These are going to go actually over those screws we preset earlier when we were getting the shelf ready. So we'll get those. And then we'll just tighten those up. I've got a few to tighten. We'll be right back. That takes care of most of the applications for a Haworth Patterns work wall. There are other applications we didn't cover here. There are some changes coming. This is a new product line for Haworth. You're going to see some evolution of this, so stay current with your instructions. Always fall back on the instructions. Any questions you have on Patterns installation or any other Haworth products, please consult your local technical Haworth representative. I guess that's it from Sebastian and myself. Good day.